Good evening. This is really wonderful. Two questions that fit right into the unfoldment that I received over there. Both about prayer, showing that the subject of prayer requires further clarification. First of all, let me remind you of something that I said several times during our 3 months of lecture work here. And that is that we must never use the words right and wrong. There is no such thing as a right way to do a thing and a wrong way to do a thing in spiritual or metaphysical teaching or living. There are states and stages of consciousness. I'll go further than that and say that absolutely there is no right or wrong in life, that everything is relative and everything is based on the particular state or stage of consciousness in which one finds oneself. And of course the first thing that comes to your mind is, what? Do you mean that it could ever be right to commit murder? And of course the answer is yes. Certainly, there isn't anyone in this room that isn't guilty of having committed murder. Not anyone. First degree murder, planned murder, well planned very often. Certainly, we've all been parties to war. And in being parties to war, we've paid for guns and ammunition, and we've sent our own children out and told them to be sure you do a good job of killing too, so that you kill a whole lot more of those than can kill us. Certainly, in the human scale, in fact in all of our human existence, there are states and stages of consciousness. There is even a time when we use exterminators on bugs and insects and flies and fleas. But there is another state of consciousness in which that is totally unnecessary, completely unnecessary. It makes no difference whether you're living in Hawaii or New York. There is a state of consciousness in which these, what we call insects and bugs and bad things, never intrude into consciousness. The outstanding experience that is in print is the experience of Alan Boone, living in a small bungalow up against a hill in Hollywood, where every day he was visited by many species of those things that inhabit the Hollywood hills. Not the big ones, just the little ones. And for a long, long time, he, like everyone else, used exterminators, until it dawned on him that there was a higher mode of life than that. And it was just about that time that he came home and found that he had left his icebox door open and some fresh food in there. And you can imagine that the ants were piled in there in regiments. And of course his first temptation was to clean house. And then the thought came, no, I can't do that. Now, I've just agreed that I'm past that stage. And so he decided to have a little talk with the ants, and he did. He drew up a chair and he sat down and talked with them. and explained very thoroughly to them that he had nothing against them. They had as much right to their lives as he had to his, and only that they had no right to intrude their lives into his refrigerator. And when he felt he had completed his job, he went to bed, and when he awakened in the morning, his place was really clean. And I know this because we saw each other every day for many, many years. Never again in that home did any kind of a visitor come until the experience with Freddie the Fly. I'm not going to take time to tell you that, but you'll find it when you read his new book, just out, Kinship with All Life. And be a good idea to go to the Honolulu bookstore and tell them they ought to have it, because you will find there that it is possible to come into the realization, the state of consciousness, that life is one and that life is God. Whether that life appears as your life or mine, or the life of an ant, or the life of a roach. Now, that does not say that using an exterminator is wrong. It says that you are in a state of consciousness and must demonstrate yourself on the level where you find yourself. That is why never do you hear in the Infinite Way message that materia medica is wrong, or that it's a sin, or that we must not have medicine or surgery or whatnot. The world would be a sad place without the development and progress that has been made in materia medica, for the simple reason that the world is living on a physical sense of life, and materia medica is the answer to bodily harmony on that plane. However, since the last century, so much has been discovered of the mental plane that many have been able to rise above the physical into the mental and some have found absolute complete freedom from all physical discords through their life on the mental plane. Others have found that they can meet 80 or 90% of their ills, and once in a while have to resort back to medical means, that is, to a state of consciousness which to some measure they have outgrown. Still others have gone higher into the spiritual realm and found absolute and complete freedom from the mental and the physical, or mostly you will find that they have again found 80 or 90% freedom from the mental and physical, but still once in a while are forced to retrace their steps, because there is no complete freedom until the ascension. Even after the resurrection, there is a wounded body, and that means probably a painful body, if not painful, at least showing the wounds. But at the ascension, all that disappears, and so it is. There is no such thing as right or wrong. There is that which meets your particular state of consciousness, and never be ashamed or afraid to acknowledge that you haven't attained the fullness, because our friend Paul did just that, acknowledging that he had not yet attained the fullness, but forgetting those things which are past and looking forward to the future, he certainly hoped to attain the fullness of the Christ. Now, in my experience of 24 years, nearly 25 in this work, I have several times fallen by the wayside insofar as not making the demonstration that appeared necessary at the moment on the level where it should have been made. I had one such experience when I was a reader and had to go on the platform holding handkerchiefs up to my nose and eyes, and I suppose that at first the congregation thought this is a fine example of a Christian Science reader walking out here with a cold that no Christian Scientist ought to have. And as a matter of fact, I could see the members of our board look at each other, much to say we're going to have something to say about this. But a very beautiful thing happened, and the 50th minute on the platform, the cold disappeared as rapidly and instantaneously as it had come, and the last 10 minutes I was as completely free as I am this minute. Then, of course, I was congratulated because I had shown the congregation a definite proof of healing power. Well, of course, it was true. There were 220 people in that congregation, and if they couldn't sit there and give me a treatment in 50 minutes to heal a cold, it would be a sad, sad commentary on Christian Science. And so it is. I have gone to my office several times when ill. Usually a cold is about the extent of it. And patients would think, that's a strange thing, coming to the office with a cold. Well, I'm not hiding it. I'm not claiming to have achieved my complete spirituality. I'm just grateful that at this moment I have something with which to work to meet this, and so let's sit here and watch it together. Now, it's the same way. I have no what they call spiritual pride. I have no pride of spiritual accomplishment. I know where I am, and I know just where I am not yet. And that's that. And anyone who can do better is certainly welcome to live their life. I'm not yet ready to say that there is right or wrong. There are states of consciousness. Now, that applies to prayer. Who would say ever that now I lay me down to sleep is wrong prayer? It just can't be wrong. It took me too many years to outgrow it. It must have served its purpose in its day, and it must be serving the purpose for other people. And so it is, any form of prayer, even if it goes back to the pagan who goes out to the sun and worships, is right prayer for that individual at that level of consciousness. In the same way, who would ever say that going to the shrine of St. Anthony in Canada or St. Anne de Beaupré or Lourdes in Belgium, who would ever say that that is wrong, where there is so much evidence, not only that people have been healed, but that so many thousands have received a spiritual uplift just from the experience of going to those shrines? Or who would ever say that they are wrong? The point is, though, that from the standpoint of absolute prayer, they do not represent prayer in the highest sense. You can go back to the Master when he told his disciples that, and others there, that no longer shall ye worship in this holy mountain, nor yet in Jerusalem. Now, of course, the highest form of worship in those days was to go to Jerusalem, to come from all over the Holy Lands to come to Jerusalem and the holy mountains. And he says that that is not now the highest form of prayer, that the highest form of prayer is to worship him in spirit and in truth. Now, how would you worship God in spirit and in truth? I might ask first, where would you worship him in spirit and in truth, since you are told not to go to the holy mountain and not to go to the temple in Jerusalem? Well, that doesn't mean that he has selected some other place. It means he has eliminated all place and gone back to the teaching that the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. Yea, if I make my bed in hell, thou art there. So if you're in hell, that's a good place to pray. And if you're in a holy mountain, that's a good place. So we start off with the fact that we are not going to say what is right prayer or what is wrong prayer. We are going to say that all prayer is right at some level of consciousness. Now you see, that means that when you come up into metaphysics and you are given affirmations and denials, we have never said that that is wrong. We have said over and over and over again that we cannot use them in the infinite way of work. But that doesn't make it wrong. That merely means that there are those who require that particular activity of prayer at a given time, and that they themselves may outgrow it, and mostly they do. It is a stepping stone. The prayer of affirmation and denial is certainly a step ahead of petition. In fact, it might be 10 steps ahead of petition. Now, first question is about prayer. In your book, The Infinite Way, on page 111, you say, before our enlightenment and truth, we sought to gain some personal end, and then you also quote Emerson on prayer. In the Bible, Jesus is quoted, therefore I say unto you, what things soever ye desire, when ye pray, believe that ye receive them, and ye shall have them. And all things whatsoever ye shall ask in prayer, believing, ye shall receive. Now you can see that in both of those, you have the opportunity or privilege of interpreting it as you will. No one has the right to say, Jesus meant this, because Jesus isn't around in our experience out here to tell us whether or not he meant what you think or what I think. Now, in my inner experience, in which and through which I learned about prayer, I have received the understanding of what he meant about these passages. But because I have will not necessarily convince you. You yourself must come to a point of conviction for yourself. Now then, you will also remember that Jesus said, take no thought for your life, what you shall eat or what you shall drink, or wherewithal you shall be clothed. That your heavenly Father knoweth that you have need of these things, and it is his good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Seek ye only the kingdom of God. The things will be added to you. Now, he also called attention to the fact that the birds and the lilies don't have to ask for anything, and what is ever clothed and fed as they are. Now, if you then were to take that particular passage, Luke 12, 22 to 32, you would say, all right, in order to be guided by that, I must never ask God for food or clothing or housing, since he already knows that I have need of these things, and it is his good pleasure to give them to me without asking. Well, if you're going to acknowledge that about food and clothing and housing, then you might as well go all the rest of the distance and say, what is the use of asking God for anything? If those three things are ruled out, let's rule out all the rest, and understand that God does know our need, and it is his good pleasure to give us the kingdom, give us the allness, everything of which we have need. Now, in that sense then, what do we understand when we read, whatsoever things ye desire, when ye pray, believe that ye receive them, and ye shall have them? And I would say this: what is it really that we should go to God for? We should go to God for light, for enlightenment. We should go to God for spiritual guidance, for spiritual wisdom. God is spirit. Then why not go to God for the things of the Spirit? Paul says, whatsoever things are of good report, whatsoever things are good, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are kind. He says nothing about the things that are representing homes and clothing and money. Now, God is spirit, and we, in our present state of humanhood, may be entertaining a sense of separation from God. And so we have to go to God, all right? Since God is spirit, let us go to God for spirit. Let us go to God for spiritual things, for spiritual wisdom, for spiritual guidance, for, if we like, we can ask for spiritual health and spiritual supply. That will avoid the possibility of thinking of God as a Santa Claus. You see, the moment you ask for money or automobiles or houses, you have turned God into a Santa Claus. Those are the things that Santa Claus ought to give us at Christmas time. But those are not the things that we should expect from God. We should expect from God the things of God: spirit, life, truth, love, harmony, peace, joy, and then watch how they appear outwardly as these needed things in the physical realm. Now again, and all things whatsoever you shall ask in prayer believing, ye shall receive. That again is the same thing. What is it that you should ask for in prayer? Ask for the realization of God. Ask for the consciousness of God's presence. Ask for God's grace. You remember it? Thy grace is my sufficiency in all things. If thy grace, God's grace, is my sufficiency in all things, why should I ask ever for anything except God's grace? But let's be sure that over and over and over again we turn to the Father within for God's grace, for the realization of God's grace. Now, in the light of our understanding today, we cannot even ask for God's grace. We can only declare that God's grace is my sufficiency. Because, now mark this well, the moment you ask God for anything, are you not acknowledging that God's sitting out here holding it back? And now you're expecting him to loose it so that you can get it? Is not asking God for food, clothing, raiment, housing, as much as to say, God, I know you've got these and can give them to me. Now come on. In other words, again, inferring that there is a withholding sense in God. Now, there is no such thing. You might just as well pray to God for sunlight. I don't think God could give you sunlight this minute, not here in Hawaii. I think that even God would have to tell you to wait a few hours and it'll come around to you. I don't think that you can plant a seed in the ground today, even in Hawaii, and pick your fruit off the tree tomorrow. You can do pretty marvelous things with the ground here, but not quite that. And going to God won't change it. The answer from God would be, it is in the ground. Be patient, and God will have its perfect work, and this will appear in its time. I do not for a moment believe that God works in miracles. That is, that God upsets spiritual law. Oh, miracles appear to our sense, not miracles to God's sense. Now, certainly fish could be made to jump up out of the sea into Rickenbacker's boat, but it didn't appear that God could put a delicatessen store out there in the middle of the Pacific on that specific day. So God's miracle appeared as fish jumping up, or rain coming from, or birds coming down. In other words, even that was a miracle to sense, but it was not to God. But sending down canned delicatessens would have been the type miracle that I doubt even God could bring about. Now you see, God is a law as well as love. And because God is law as well as love, God works according to law as well as according to love. Now then, the thing that came to me in the meditation there was this. I wanted to start right out and say that when you pray, don't pray as if there were anything that you needed or desired or wanted, because that would be seeking to influence God to bring it about for you. Watch out. I'm speaking now from the standpoint of the infinite way. I am not speaking from the standpoint of the Hebrew church or Protestant church or Catholic church, although Bishop Sheehan did tell his audience that they should get rid of petitionary prayer, that the prayer of petition is not prayer at all, or at best it's secondary and not very good. And he also told them not to pray for material things, but to turn to God only for spiritual things. So you see, it isn't only the infinite way that is calling attention to this fact that God is spirit and God is law. That is now beginning to appear in other literature in the world. And it will continue to appear until the world's concept of prayer has changed. And I wouldn't be surprised that 25 years from now, people will be reading old prayer books and say, I don't believe it. I don't believe that anybody thought there was that kind of a God in the world. And as a matter of fact, there isn't and never has been. And so it is. In opening ourselves in desire, whatsoever things ye desire, let us purify our desire and be sure that the only thing we desire is God. Acquaint now thyself with him and be at peace. Our only desire should be to know God. To know God aright is life eternal. It doesn't say anything about asking him for something. To know God aright is life eternal. Acquaint now thyself with him and be at peace. And so let us forget the things of the world. Let us forget the conditions of the world. When I say forget, I'm talking about in moments of prayer. And turn to God with only a pure desire to know God, to know him aright, and then find life eternal. To get acquainted with him and be at peace. Let our entire prayer have only one significance. Father, reveal thyself. Father, reveal thyself. I need nothing. Thy grace is my sufficiency. If you could take that mental attitude that thy grace is my sufficiency, you will find that you will be abundantly satisfied with every good thing necessary for human experience. You separate yourself from deific power and deific presence the very moment that you have a desire for a thing or a person or a place. Because if that were in God's realm, it would be provided before you could express the desire. It is God's good pleasure to give you the kingdom even before you call. Even before they call, I will answer. Yes, but many people have said, that hasn't happened to me. I've called and called and called, and God didn't answer. But they were calling for things instead of calling for God. That is why, where is it? Is it in the June letter? That the day must come when we go to God only for God, and never for anything else. Never, never, never. There can be no exception to the rule. Now, we'll come to that in a moment. Was Jesus misunderstood and misquoted? No, I don't think so. I think they quoted him correctly, but I think that if you would examine his teaching, not just taking one isolated statement, but taking the four Gospels, I think you would come to the conclusion that Jesus never meant us to pray for things. Even when he multiplied loaves and fishes, there is no indication that he prayed to God for things. It says merely that he lifted his eyes to God, to heaven, to the Father. And in doing that, he was acknowledging, I can of my own self do nothing. Father, let her flow. Now, in the same way, standing at the tomb of Lazarus, he said very clearly that there was no need for him to pray. Oh, but for the sake of these people around here who expect to hear words, I'll say something. Lazarus, come forth. No, that wasn't necessary. God didn't need Jesus to say, Lazarus, come forth. God could have brought Lazarus forth without any words from Jesus' lips. And what would have done it? Just the ability of Jesus to tune in. Now, was this the first year of Jesus' teaching, and did he change his point of view later? No. No, I'm sure that Jesus was well aware when he went into the ministry at the age of 30. I'm sure he had already attained his spiritual wisdom on the subject of prayer, and that he knew then that true prayer was a communion with the Father within. It was not a turning God into Santa Claus, nor was it looking upon God as a great philanthropist. I'm sure that Jesus knew that God is spirit. Not God as a superman or a supermarket. God is spirit. And when Jesus knew that, he knew the next thing. Pray without ceasing. Be in tune always with God. Turn to the Father within. Not for things, for communion, for acquaintanceship, for oneness, at one-ment. Then all these things will be added unto you. Jesus always knew that right from the beginning. And he met the need, whether it was for wine at the wedding or food in the wilderness. He met the need not through asking for things, but through his communion. As a matter of fact, he was tempted to ask God for things. He was tempted in the wilderness to turn stone into bread. And he rejected the temptation, refused. Absolutely refused to make a demonstration. Certainly, Jesus never made a demonstration of anything but the demonstration of God's presence, the conscious realization of God's presence, the conscious contact and union with God. Now, you will find that while there are those who will still pray in their own way and attain some measure of answer, you will find that as you grow in spiritual development, you will learn that God is not a giving God And God is not a withholding God. God is just an ising God. God just is. God eternally is, and there's no use of going to God for anything except going within oneself for a communion, for a spiritual minute or hour with God. Now, in this meditation that we had here this evening, that was conducted by Mrs. Shigemura, you must certainly have felt that there were no words uttered and no thoughts thought. That there was just a complete state of receptivity, because in that seeming vacuum produced by not thinking and just by listening, receptivity, you could just feel waves of that spirit coming in. Now then, let us assume this minute that God is the all-knowing mind. That is, the all-knowing intelligence of this universe. What would you tell God that God does not already know? Let us assume for this moment that God is divine love. What do you think God is withholding from anyone on earth, or in heaven, or in hell? If God is divine love, nothing is being withheld, then what is the use of asking God? You know that I have called this to your attention, not only here in Hawaii, but in the writings and recordings for these last 3 years, that was the horror of the church throughout the Depression, that it was permitting itself to pray to God for supply. That was one of the horrible, horrible things that happened for 10 long years, that churches throughout the world were opening their doors to pray to God for supply. Never was God so dishonored in the history of the world. Why, there wasn't an ocean or river in the world that wasn't stocked with fish. There wasn't a mountain that wasn't full of cattle. There wasn't a piece of ground anywhere in the world that wasn't filled with vegetables and fruits and berries of all kinds. The air was just loaded with birds all over the world, and here were the churches opening their doors and praying, God, give us supply. Was ever anything so disgraceful as an example of not understanding the nature of God? God wasn't withholding supply. God never withheld supply. Why, in our own country, there were thousands of boatloads of food taken out to the ocean and sank. There were thousands of storehouses filled with food that were burned. As recently as last year, $500,000 worth of crops in the county of Sacramento were burned up to keep them off the market. All paid for by the government and the churches and people praying for supply. What more can God do than fill the air and fill the waters and fill the earth? Gold, oil, diamonds, jewels of all kinds, pearls, everything to wear, everything to eat, sheep, lamb, cows, cattle, horses. Now, why pray to God? Why not turn within and say, Father, what is wrong that we are not experiencing this abundance? It's here, it's in our nation, it's right in the back of the hills here. What is wrong? I know what answer would come, because it came to me in a poem, and I'm not a poet. The answer is, look to your government of men. They are destroying what I have so abundantly given you. Look there for the correction. Don't come to me for more crops when you're already burning what I'm sending you. What good would it do you if I fill this earth with 4 times more crops or 4 times more fish? You wouldn't get any of them. No. That alone should teach us something of the nature of prayer. That alone. That alone must show us that God is not withholding sunlight, God is not withholding rain, God is not withholding dew, God is not withholding fish or birds or crops, platinum, uranium. Then how shall we pray so as we may avail ourselves of that which God has already so abundantly provided? Well, I can tell you from my personal experience and the experience of those with whom I have worked in this ministry, there is a way whereby you can bring these crops to your very door, and these fish and these birds and whatever else you need. And that is this. First of all, honor God. And that means never try to influence God to do something or ask God for anything, but acknowledge that God is already the all-knowing mind and the all-loving soul of this universe. Acknowledge that, and then be still. Just be still then inside and develop a love for God and a gratitude for God's allness and God's perfection and God's presence and God's wisdom and God's grace. Learn gratitude for the fact that the earth is full of the Lord. The earth is full of the Lord. The heavens declare the glory. The earth showeth forth his handiwork. Why, heaven and earth and hell are filled with the glory of God. Learn to love that truth and to live with it and be grateful, and never again lift your mind to God with a single desire. Then you will have learned true prayer. Then you will have learned communion with God, and then the miracle will happen that the refrigerator will always be full. The bin will always be full. Everything necessary. How it will come about is not my business or yours. Each day you will awaken and you will be given the work that is yours to do, and you will be given the fruitage in its place. Only when you start to outline what the fruitage should be or how it shall come, you are down on the human level and you are not communing with a spiritual God in spirit. Now, gratitude is without question one of the most wonderful forms of love that ever has existed. When I say gratitude, I don't mean in the metaphysical sense of bringing money to your practitioner. That isn't what I'm talking about when I speak of gratitude. When I speak of gratitude, I'm talking about the gratitude that you feel in your heart when you look out and see a world full of green grass and blossoming trees and fruit. When you see this earth full of God's glory, when you see the infinite variety of color and form of flowers and shrubs, when you see this wonderful sunlight or snow or rain, when you see all the graces that God has bestowed on this earth, how it would be possible not to develop a gratitude, a love. Then in that gratitude and in that love, there is a communion with God, and his Spirit flows freely through you. There's no other way to open your soul to the flow of God except through gratitude and love. And not gratitude for something good that happened to you. I'm not talking of that kind of gratitude. I'm not talking about gratitude that has an object. I'm not even speaking of love for somebody who does a favor for you. That isn't love, and that isn't gratitude. I'm speaking of gratitude and love that has no object, that you just love because of love and are grateful because of grateful, not because of some particular good that has come to you. And probably at this minute, all the good in the world is going to the other fellow and not to you. But even that is a cause for gratitude. It's going to someone. It's showing evidence of being and existence, and your turn must come too. You see, prayer is communion with God. Prayer, in its highest sense, is wordless. Why? What shall I say to God? Wouldn't it be wonderful if I never had a thought in my head so that God could continuously talk to me? Wouldn't that be a deal? If only I could be so receptive and responsive that God would keep talking to me forever, I'd be satisfied to be silent in His presence. Oh, yes, and in my prayer and in my meditations, I am silent. I may do a lot of talking when I have an audience, but I don't do it when I'm in front of God. No, I have nothing to say to God ever except this feeling of love and of gratitude. I have nothing to say to God. I have only to learn from God, to be taught of God, to be fed and maintained and sustained, and for that I don't have to tell God. God knows more about my needs than I do. I can tell that the way He's moved me around the world without my having had anything to do with it. I know He knows my needs more than I do, and He's always provided every step of the way, whether it was a message for a class or whether it was for the money to put out a publication or to finance tape recordings. Whatever it was, it has always appeared, and never once have I consciously gone to God. I learned a lesson in 1931. When I went into the practice, I had come out of an experience wherein my worldly goods had fled. And so I became a practitioner with $150 in the world. And my first month's office rent, no, I had $250. My first month's office rent was $120. And that was the way I began. Well, I was very fortunate, and things went well, but they didn't always go timely. And so there were some months when my bills weren't paid on the 1st of the month. It took till the 10th or 15th of the month to pay up last month's bills. And on one of those occasions, it was the 10th of the month, and I still owed some money. So I looked in my little book, and I found that I owed $100 on last month's bills, but I had $150 outstanding with Mrs. Jones and Brown and Smith and so forth. And so I said, oh, well, I'm all right. I only owe $100, and I have $150 outstanding. And so I went to bed and went to sleep, very peaceful. But at 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up, and the thought came, what? I'm all right because I owe 100 and I have 150. Oh, I don't need God. Well, I've just left God right out of the picture. My need was met with $150. Oh, no, that won't do. That won't do. And so I got up and I wrote receipted bills for the $150. And at the bottom I put, a wonderful thing has just happened to me, and I want to share this experience with you, so please accept this receipted bill. Then I went to bed, and I said, now, Father, I still owe $100, but I haven't got 150 now. I've only got God. And if I haven't got God, there's a practitioner out of luck tomorrow, and out of business, too. The next night, I went to a church meeting and committee meeting. I didn't get home till late to my hotel. As I walked into the lobby, there's a traveling man standing there whom I hadn't seen in 13 years. 13 years before, I met him on the street, and he was, in the vernacular, drunk as a lord. And I took him to my room and had his clothes cleaned up, gave him a night's sleep, cleaned him up, gave him some money to get out on the road, and the war came. He enlisted and I enlisted, and for 13 years we never met again, until that night at 12 o'clock in the lobby of this hotel. I asked him what he was doing there. He's on his honeymoon, and they decided to come to a quiet hotel. That's why they were there. And what are you doing in the lobby at midnight? My wife doesn't like smoking, so I have to smoke my cigar in the lobby before I retire. Fine. And so we renewed an acquaintanceship of 13 years before, And then he said, you know, I owe you some money. Well, that's a happy idea. It's been outlawed a couple of times, but, outlawed, what do you mean? He's one thing I know, you'll never need money. Well, that was a happy memory from the days when it was true. So we tried to figure how much he owed me, and we couldn't, but the nearest we got to it was $150. And to help me, this is a true story, I had a check for $150 from him that night, and I thought, well, it's all right, God. I don't need Mrs. Brown, Smith, or Jones. I have got God. And I'll tell you, the sequel is this. From that day to this, no one has ever received a statement from me or a bill from me. No one has ever been asked for money. And even in our book department, once they slipped up and did send somebody a statement for an overdue bill, and they were told prettily about it, too. Even in our book department, never is a request made for money. Never. When the books go out, or when our services go out, or when classes go out, that is the individual's demonstration, not mine. I made my demonstration in 1931 when I found that I had God. Now, whether anyone pays a bill or not, God is taking care of me. And it has been so from that day to this. Now, each one has some kind of an experience which proves that God is with them. And it isn't only in money matters. Mr. Blanding can tell you that it's the same thing with ideas. You may seem very hungry or thirsty for a while for ideas, but if you have ever made your contact with God, you only have to be patient, because you may be going through a period of barrenness, or what seems outwardly as barrenness, but which really is a refilling. And so if you're patient enough, the ideas will come, whether it's paintings, whether it's poetry, whether it's playwriting, whether it's short story, whether it's a new way of teaching, whatever it may be, whether it's the idea for our work. If you have ever made contact with God, and remember I say if, God is omnipresent, but God is omnipresent to the man who is starving to death. God is omnipresent to the man who's dying of a disease. God is omnipresent in prison. So God is of no avail just because of omnipresence. The availability of God is through your contact. And that's where prayer comes in. Prayer is the means of contact with God, but prayer has no relationship to words or thoughts. Prayer is an attitude of being. Prayer is a state of communion, a state of receptivity. Prayer is an inner grace, an inner sense of gratitude and peace and confidence and joy, and then finally, eventually, comes a click. Something like that says, the contact is made. And after that, then you can say with Paul, I live, yet not I. Christ liveth my life. And so it is that God is the divine presence that goes before us to make the crooked places straight. God it is that knows our need before we do, and it is his good pleasure to give us the whole kingdom. Now you see, when people, as is happening in the world, are suffering with sin, disease, death, lack, limitation, it represents but one thing: a lack of contact with God. And that is why the message of the infinite way, you've seen that in some of the monthly letters recently, the message of the infinite way is devoted not to giving the world a teaching, but to giving the world a God contact or experience. A teaching isn't necessary in the world. The teaching of Lao Tse is good enough to last anybody forever. The teaching of Jesus, as given in the Gospels, is enough to last the world forever. Emerson's essay is enough for any man's religion for all time to come. The world doesn't need a new religion, and the world doesn't need a new teaching. It needs a conscious experience with God. Not only the world needs it, We need it. And we need to renew it every single day, and eventually to renew it 12 times a day, 20 times a day. Why? It isn't that it's ever lost once it's made. It's only that the pressure of the world would tend to separate us from its benefit. It is almost an impossibility to read the nonsense in newspapers and hear the nonsense on the air and still keep your sanity, at least your spiritual sanity. It's an impossibility to keep in the center of God and still be concerned with all of this betrayal of the world, whether in Korea, whether in Indochina, or whether in Pearl Harbor. These are all betrayals by men. Well, if you're going to live your life living in those betrayals and fearing them and wondering what's going to happen to them, you're going to live out here in the very mesmerism, and you'll have no sense of God. Now, you can't help the people who want to live out there in that world of mess. You can't help them. If that is at what they are ready for at this particular time, that's where they are. That is why we do not advertise this message. This message isn't for a street corner or a great big edifice. This message is for those who are ready to experience God. Not to join some kind of a movement so you have a place to go Wednesday night and Sunday. Nothing wrong with going there. But the mere fact of living from Wednesday night to Sunday and Sunday to Wednesday night, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. But once you're free of that, once you're free to live your spiritual life within your own being so that you can worship the Father in spirit and in truth, and worship God through love and through gratitude and through service to each other, service, not self-seeking, then you will find the real meaning of prayer. Then you can say, or quote, or have quoted to you, knock, and it shall be opened unto you. Seek, and ye shall find. Yes, knock at the door of your own consciousness until you get an answer from within. The kingdom of God is within you, so the answer has to come from within you. So keep knocking at the door of your consciousness. Keep seeking. Where? Within. Seek in spirit, seek in truth, and ultimately it will come. It is true, the Master says, the way is straight and narrow, and few there be that enter. This is not an easy path. Attaining God experience is not a simple matter, because we have behind us generations and generations of materialistic living and thinking, and latterly some mental hocus pocus, all standing in the way of our actual communion with the Father within us, which is in no wise dependent on either thing or thought. No one has to think a thought to commune with God. Otherwise, the birds wouldn't be able to commune, and the animals wouldn't be able to commune. And believe me, they know the secret of communion. They really do. They are supported and fed and maintained by cosmic law, by the Father within them. So they must know how to go within, how to live in that law, and how to do it without the use of words or thoughts. Now, we need no words and we need no thoughts in relationship to God. If you would have a period such as we had here this evening of even 15 minutes of silence in which you thought no thoughts to God and made no statements to God, but were continuously in this sense of receptivity, you would soon find that there would be an impartation from the Spirit to you, within you, and that in its time, that impartation would appear outwardly as physical, mental, moral, financial harmony. But the contact must be made.